The morning was unusually quiet. It felt heavy, and the silence between you and Jungkook seemed so loud. You woke up late, and when you looked over at him, he was sitting by the window staring at his phone. He hadn't said much this morning, and you knew it was because of the fight you had last night. It was such a silly argument, something so small, but you had said things you shouldn't have. You had hurt him, and now he was distant, keeping to himself. You felt bad about it. You hated that he was upset with you, but you didn't know how to fix it. Apologizing was hard for you, and you didn't know what to say, but you knew you had to do something. You decided to show him you were sorry, hoping a hug would work. You got out of the bed and walked towards him, your heart beating faster. You could feel the guilt in your chest, but you just wanted to make things right. A hug felt like the easiest way to show him that you cared, to let him know you regretted the fight. But when you reached him and stretched out your arms, he moved away. It wasn't a harsh move, but he clearly didn't want to be touched. He didn't even look up from his phone. You froze, your arms still outstretched, feeling the rejection all over again. His eyes stayed on the screen, and it hurt more than you expected. Jungkook, you said quietly, your voice soft, almost pleading. He didn't answer right away. He just sighed and kept looking at his phone. You should have thought about the last night, he said. His voice was calm but disappointed. You took a step closer, hoping he would let you in, hoping he would meet you halfway, but he leaned back in his chair, pulling away from you even more. It wasn't like he was yelling at you, but it still felt like a rejection. Why won't you let me hug you? You asked. Your voice was shaking a little. He looked at you for a second, then turned back to his phone. I'm not in the mood for this. You felt your heart sink. The words stung more than you expected. You had thought he would let you in, at least for a moment, but he didn't, and it made you feel small. Jungkook, you whispered again, trying to get his attention, but he didn't look up. He just stayed silent, as if pretending you weren't there. Your frustration grew. You wanted to shout, to demand that he look at you, to tell him how sorry you were. But instead you just stood there, feeling the anger build up inside. Why wasn't he trying? Fine, if you don't want me to hug you, I won't. He didn't respond. He just stayed focused on his phone. The rejection hit you hard, but you were too proud to let him see how much it hurt. You turned away from him, walking out of the room without saying another word. Jungkook sat there, his phone still in his hands, but his mind was miles away. He could feel the weight of the silence pressing down on him, but he didn't know what to do about it. He knew you were upset, but he wasn't sure what you wanted. The way you had spoken to him last night still echoed in his mind. Words you said in the heat of the moment that cut deeper than you probably realized. He wasn't mad at you, no. It wasn't anger he felt, it was hurt. He just wanted you to see that he was always there for you, that his love wasn't conditional, but it felt like you were taking him for granted. And when you had snapped at him, blaming him for things beyond his control, something inside him had snapped too. The rejection earlier, when you tried to hug him, he hadn't meant to push you away, but he wasn't ready to accept your physical affection. When the emotional distance between you felt so much wider, it wasn't about your hug, not really. It was about needing you to understand what he was feeling. He needed you to see the hurt in his eyes, to understand the weight of the words you had said. He wanted to hold you, pull you into his arms, and forget everything, but he couldn't let it go so easily. Not when you hadn't apologized, not when the conversation from last night still felt unresolved in his heart. He had been there for you through everything, always doing his best to be a good husband. But when you accused him for not trying, for not caring, he didn't know how to respond, so he shut down. The next few hours passed with a painful silence between you. You didn't speak to him, didn't look at him. He noticed how you avoided his gaze whenever you were in the same room, how you stayed distant when you walked past him. It was clear you were angry too, but he wasn't sure if you were angry with him or with yourself. The weight of it all pressed down on him and he just wanted it to end. As the day wore on, Jungkook couldn't take the silence anymore. He couldn't stay in this space of emotional distance, unable to talk things through with you. He needed to make it right, to show you that he wasn't angry, just hurt. So he found you sitting on the couch staring blankly at the wall and walked over to you, his steps tentative. "I need to talk to you," he said quietly, standing a few feet away from you. He wasn't sure how to start, but he knew he couldn't stay silent either. As Jungkook's voice broke through the silence, you felt a tight knot form in your chest. You didn't want to talk, not yet. The tension in the room was suffocating, and you weren't ready to confront everything that had happened. You didn't want to hear his apologies or explanations, not right now. When you heard him step closer, his voice was so calm, yet filled with emotion. Something inside you snapped. You couldn't let him come near you, couldn't let him touch you again, when it felt like the distance between you was so much. "Ryan, I need to talk to you," Jungkook repeated. His voice was quieter this time, but still strong. He was standing just a few feet away, his eyes searching for yours for any sign of acknowledgement. But you didn't respond. You stood up slowly, trying to keep your distance, your heart pounding in your chest. The last thing you wanted was for him to try to pull you into his arms when everything still felt so raw. You started walking towards the hallway, your back to him, as you tried to keep your composure, but just as you were about to pass him, you felt his hand wrap gently around your wrist, stopping you in your tracks. "Ryan, please, let's talk. I need you to understand." Jungkook's voice was soft but desperate. The moment his fingers brushed your skin, you flinched. A wave of frustration and hurt flooded through you. You pulled your arm away sharply, looking at him with a mix of anger and sadness. "No, don't touch me, Jungkook." Your voice trembled slightly. He froze, his expression shifted for a moment. "Ryan, I said no," you repeated, your heart aching with each word. You turned your back to him again, but this time you didn't move. You couldn't bring yourself to leave the room. You stood there a few feet away from him, feeling the weight. Jungkook stood still, watching you, trying to make sense of your reaction. His heart ached at the distance you were putting between you both, but he couldn't blame you. He had pushed you away earlier, and he knew that the hurt had built up more than he had realized. "I don't want to hurt you," he said quietly, taking a small step towards you again, but careful not to invade your space. I just, I need you to understand why I reacted the way I did. I didn't mean to hurt you, but when you said those things last night." You turned around to face him, your eyes full of unshed tears. "I was wrong, Jungkook. I shouldn't have said those things to you. I was upset and I took it out on you, but that doesn't make it okay." He watched you, his eyes softened as he took in your words. "It's not just about the thing you said," he replied, taking another step closer but still not trying to touch you. "Is that I felt like you didn't see me, like I was just the person you came to when you needed something, but not really the person you trusted to support you when you were struggling." Your chest tightened at his words. It wasn't something you had thought about before, but now that he said it, it stung. You had been so caught up in your own feelings that you hadn't realized how much he had been giving to you, trying to be your rock. "I do see you, Jungkook," you said, finally stepping closer to him, your voice shaky but genuine. "I do, but I have been so confused. I didn't know how to deal with everything. I didn't know how to make it right between us." Jungkook's eyes softened and he took a deep breath. "I know you have been struggling and I want to help, but I need you to let me in. Let me be there for you." For a moment, you both stood there looking at each other, the weight of the situation hanging heavily between you. You knew he was right. You had been pushing him away, and he had only tried to love you the best way he knew how. "I don't want to push you away anymore. I've been so stubborn, and I'm sorry for that," you whispered, feeling the walls around your heart starting to crumble. Jungkook finally closed the distance between you, his arms slowly wrapping around your shoulders. This time you didn't pull away. You didn't want to. You felt his warmth envelop you, and it made everything felt just a little bit easier. "I love you, Ryan," He whispered into your hair, his voice steady but full of emotion. And I'll always be here for you no matter what. I love you too. I'm sorry for everything. You whispered back, your voice soft but filled with sincerity. He pulled back slightly enough to look into your eyes, his thumb gently brushing away the tears that had escaped your eyes. You don't have to apologize anymore. We are in this together always. And for the first time that day, you smiled, truly smiled, feeling the love between you both begin to heal the hurt. The silence that had once felt so heavy between you now felt comforting, like a promise that you both would always find your way back to each other. With a deep breath, you wrapped your arms around him once again, holding him tightly, not wanting to let go. This time, when he held you, you didn't feel the need to pull away. You felt safe, loved, and ready to face whatever come next together. From the moment you and Jungkook were arranged to be married, you were reluctant. You had never believed in arranged marriages, and the thought of being with someone you barely knew, forced by circumstances beyond your control, left a bitter taste in your mouth. Jungkook, on the other hand, was everything anyone could hope for in a partner. But none of that mattered to you. Your mind was made up. You were going to make this work, not because you wanted it, but because it was what was expected of you. Your family had insisted that the marriage be set up, and although you voiced your objections, you were silenced by the weight of tradition and family obligation. You couldn't help but resent the situation. This wasn't love, it was just a union formed for convenience. So when you stood at the altar, you wore the veil, smiled the smile you had practiced, but inside you felt cold and distant. You didn't have any affection for the man you had just promised to marry for life. But as the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, something changed, slowly, subtly. Jungkook's love for you was relentless and his patience never wavered. He never pushed you to open up, never rushed you into something you weren't ready for. He gave you space when you needed it. But when you did allow him in, he was there for you with all his heart. His thoughtfulness, the little things he did, like the way he would cook for you after a long day, or how he would always listen even when you had nothing important to say, begin to melt your defenses. There was one moment a few months into your marriage when Jungkook had done something so simple that it caught you off guard. You had been feeling particularly down that day, unsure of your place in this marriage, when he came home early, took you to dinner, and without saying a word simply held you in his arms for what felt like forever. His embrace was warm, and for the first time since the wedding, you felt like maybe, just maybe, you could allow yourself to trust him. But old habits die hard, and even though you were slowly falling for him, your heart was still weary. The wounds of a forced marriage, a life lived in the shadow of someone else's plans, were not healed so easily. As the time went on, you found yourself caught in a battle between your heart and your pride. You wanted to love him, you truly did. But you couldn't bring yourself to fully accept it. You were still angry at the situation, angry at your parents, angry at life for making you live this way. You fought your feelings every step of the way. Then came the fight that changed everything. You closed your eyes, allowing the warmth of his embrace to wash over you. The sound of his heartbeat, steady and strong, soothed the nervousness fluttering in your chest. As you stood there in his arms, you realized something you had been denying for so long. You had been foolish to keep your walls up, to push him away when all he had ever done was love you with such patience and understanding. I'm sorry, you whispered again, the words feeling like a confession but also a plea, one that you knew he would hear no matter how many times you repeated it. Jungkook tightened his hold on you, brushing his fingers through your hair in a calming motion. You don't need to apologize anymore. I understand. It's not easy for you. I know that. You felt the tears welling up again, but this time they weren't tears of frustration or anger. They were tears of relief, of knowing that you weren't alone in this. He was there for you even when you didn't want. I didn't mean to hurt you. I was scared. I didn't want to admit how much I needed you, how much I was falling for you. Jungkook pulled back just enough to look into your eyes, his gaze searching as if trying to see into your very soul. You don't have to be scared, Ryan. I'll always be here. I've always been here. Sincerity in his words cut through the last of your hesitation, and for the first time in a long time, you allowed yourself to be vulnerable in his arms. You had been so afraid of letting him in, afraid of feeling too much, but now, with his love surrounding you, all of those fears seem to fade into the background. I've been so stubborn. I pushed you away because I was afraid of what I might feel, but I don't want to be afraid anymore. Jungkook smiled softly, brushing his thumb gently over your cheek. You don't have to be afraid of me, Ryan. You never did. I'm not going anywhere. In that moment, you realized just how much he meant to you, how much you had needed him all along, even when you had convinced yourself otherwise. The walls you had built around your heart, the ones that kept you from truly loving him, were crumbling piece by piece with every word he spoke. I know we have had our fights and there will be more, I'm sure, but I want to be with you, Jungkook, through everything, even when things get tough. I want to face them with you. I don't want to push you away anymore. Jungkook's expression softened and he cupped your face in his hands, his gaze filled with both tenderness and determination. I've always wanted to be with you, Ryan. I've never given up on you, even when it seemed like you were pushing me away. I'll always fight for us, for you. Tears welled up in your eyes, but this time they were tears of gratitude, of love. Thank you. Thank you for being patient with me. I don't deserve you, but I'm going to try. I'll try to be the person you need me to be. Jungkook leaned down, brushing his lips against your forehead, and for the first time you allowed yourself to fully relax in his arms. You don't have to try to be anyone else. You're perfect just the way you are. And in that moment, you knew he was right. You didn't have to be perfect. You didn't have to have all the answers. As long as you were together, that was all that mattered. The future may have been uncertain, but with Jungkook by your side, you knew you could face whatever came your way. You pulled back slightly, looking up at him with a small smile. I love you. You whispered the words coming easily now. Jungkook's eyes softened and he pressed a kiss to your lips, tender and slow, as if trying to convey everything he felt in that one gesture. When he pulled away, he smiled, his eyes glistening. I love you too, Ryan. Always. And as the days passed, the bond between you grew even stronger. No matter what challenges lay ahead, you both knew one thing: you would always come back to each other because love, real love, was about more than just the good times. It was about sticking together through the tough times, learning from your mistakes, and growing stronger as a couple. No matter how many battles you faced in your marriage, you knew that in the end you would always want to be with Jungkook, and that was all that mattered.